I would imagine Joel Embiid will play. I don't know that to be certain. Let's ask Michael Kaskey-Blomain from CBS Sports if there is any update, when we expect an update. MKB covers the NBA and the Sixers for CBS Sports, and he joins us now on the Boardwalk Honda hotline. So, MKB, we did get Davis Bertans' MRI information. He is out for the rest of the series. So what is taking so long with Joel Embiid's updated information? What do we know?
You got to build the suspense, Mike. I mean, it got to keep people on the edge of their seat for as long as possible. But no, I do think that we will get an update sometime today. The team traveled back after the game, obviously, last night and got back to Philly pretty late. I think the MRI is already in the books from what I was told, but, we're all just waiting on an update at this point.
Right. I mean, is there any gut feeling of whether this is a serious situation? I mean, does it seem like, hey, this was a precautionary thing? What do we know about the potential severity of this?
Yeah, so it's tough to say. I've talked to a couple of people within the team who obviously aren't, able to go on record and say anything other than speculation. I don't think that it's a serious situation. I think the entire thing is pretty, out of precaution. I do think there's a chance he sits out tomorrow night in Game 5, honestly, regardless of the outcome. I think that the consensus within the organization is that obviously they should probably be able to close out this series with or without him. And then, getting him a couple extra days off for, if he doesn't play in the game tomorrow and they're able to win, there's a couple days off in between the next series. A little extra time for him to heal and rest the knee would be beneficial. But I don't think it's, at least from the indications that I've been getting, it's not a situation where he's going to have to miss, extended time. All
right. So Ben Simmons, Joel Embiid, we will wait to see the update on that. MKB here from CBS Sports. They are waiting for the results. And as you said, you don't know if he'll play tomorrow night. There's a possibility that he would not. So let's look back to last night. When you look at the game last night and why they lost that game, what's the first couple things that say they lost this game because?
Well, obviously, the Joel injury is, I'm sure, the first thing that everyone would say. They were continuing on the path of playing really well when he was in the game. Obviously, he goes out and everything changes. But after that, I think there's still, obviously, they should have had the opportunity to pull it out. I think it was a combination of things. Tobias Harris had a really rough game, 8 of 24 from the floor. Same with a couple of the other shooters. Steph Curry didn't have his best game. He didn't hit a three. He was only 5 for 11. Obviously, everyone's going to point to the free throws at the end of Ben Simmons, and Ben also didn't have, his best, most aggressive game. So I think it was kind of just the perfect storm of factors. And from an impartial perspective, the refereeing was, pretty egregious. And after the game, I think the Sixers acknowledged that they spent a little bit too much time. At least Ben and Tobias both said they thought the team spent a little too much time worrying about the calls, going back and forth with the refs instead of concentrating on the game. And then ultimately, it was a game where they were on the road. The other team is down 3-0, fighting for their season in front of their home crowd. And it was a situation where the Wizards were either going to roll over and lay down or they were going to fight. And they obviously have, Russell Westbrook on that team, Bradley Beal in front of their home crowd. And they just weren't ready to, for their season to end. So it was obviously a tough loss for Philly, but I think it was just a combination of several factors coming together.
You didn't mention the Ben Simmons free throw shooting. So on the pantheon of reasons why they lost that game, where does that where do you include that? I mean, is that a big reason why they lost that game? Is it part of the reason why they lost that game? What say you about that?
Yeah, it was definitely a part of the reason. I don't think it was the number one reason. Obviously, the game was close enough at that point that it was a factor. I think Ben's play in general was obviously a reason. He said afterwards that he could have been more aggressive. I think that was the case. I definitely think they kind of got in his head a little bit with the fouls down the stretch. And, he needs to make them at a better clip. There's no doubt about it. I'm not one of the people that thinks it was the main reason that they lost or that was the turning point in the game. I think it, started to stem from as soon as Embiid got out, the wheels kind of fell off and it went from there. But obviously it's a situation moving forward where, they'll get past this series. But, Ben, they want him on the floor. And if he can't make the free throws down the stretch, Doc is going to have a tough decision to make.
Yeah, absolutely. And he was asked last night, were you thinking about taking him out? He's obviously shot that right down, nor should he be thinking about taking him out. I mean, you look back at that whole situation, Mike, it was a tie game when they started to foul him. At the end of that 40-second hack of Ben, they were down a point. I mean, that is a game within reach, whether if he made all 6 free throws, they're only up by a point, really. I thought in the end, with less than 2 minutes left in that game, their defense kind of fell apart, right? I mean, they got to do a better job. Yeah, Ben, if he makes those shots, they're up a point. They're up a point, and they have the lead. But even with him shooting 50% from the line, it's a 1-point game. They got to play better defense down that stretch. That's what they're known for, and I thought that failed them the most.
Yeah, I agree, Mike. And obviously Joel not being in the back there to solidify the defense had a lot to do with that. But, yeah, they gave up, a lot of easy looks, easy baskets down the fourth quarter. And I think that translated to the offense, too. They thrive when they're getting stops, getting steals, getting out in transition, and getting open looks for their shooters. They're obviously less effective when they're forced to, play at a slower pace and play through the half court, especially without Joel to play through in the half court. And that's basically what happened last night. Like you said, the defense let them down on one end. And then to me, that led to, them struggling to find good looks on the offensive end. And Ben's free throw shooting, it's a thing where obviously if you're watching, it's easy to point out to. But, Doc made a good point after the game. He said, the 3 trips he made, they got 1 point per possession on each of those trips. From an analytical standpoint as a coach, he said, he'd take that every time. If you're every time down the floor, you're going to get 1 point. So, I think Doc was a little bit over the top with his,
no doubt.
Having Ben's back, which I think was, a sign to Ben to show that the coach, I think he was mainly talking to Ben as much as he was talking to us in the media last night. But I do think that it was overblown how much of an impact that had down the stretch. I think there were other factors like the defense, like you said.
Yeah, I mean, look, people have it in their head. They either don't like Ben, or they either like him or they don't like him, or they think he's, if you don't shoot, you stink. You're the horrible. You can't play in this league, in a league that shoots. So you have that mindset, waiting for that moment to be like, hey, see, he cost us in that moment because he could not convert on these free throws. I think people were just waiting for that moment. My question really is, can teams continue to do this? Will they start fouling at the 5-minute mark? I mean, last night was a 40-second swing. I mean, it was at 2:47. The last foul on him was at 2:07. I don't even think half the people out there realize you can't intentionally foul anymore, because people are like, the last 2 minutes, you got to get him off the floor. No, you can't intentionally foul anymore. So are teams going to start doing this earlier in the fourth quarter?
I think it's a concern, Mike, and I think that's the only reason that it's really a story. I think last night, like we were saying, that it wasn't, to me, one of the 2 or 3 main factors in that loss. But I do think moving forward, and in this situation, they're already up 3-0 in a series. But if you're talking about a series against the Bucks, against the Nets, where really every point matters, and you're talking about the fourth quarter, and Ben's out there leading up to that 2-minute mark, like you said. And Doc obviously said last night he wants him on the floor for his defense. He wants him on the floor for his playmaking. But if you have a coach that's going to follow in Scott Brooks' footsteps and follow him, like you said, around the 6-minute mark of the fourth quarter, around the 5-minute mark of the fourth quarter, and he's not knocking them down consistently, at that point, you really do have to, if you're Doc, you have to wonder, do I take him out until that 2-minute mark and put, a Tyrese Maxey in there, or George Hill, a guy that obviously that they can't foul, and then so it all falls on Ben. Obviously, if he can knock him down at even a 55, 60, 65% clip, it's a non-factor. So,
I mean, it was weird. There was a stretch this year where he looked way more comfortable and confident shooting the free throw, right? And then and then it kind of went away. The second half, the last month or so of the season, it kind of went away to the point where he had this 0 for 10, 11 straight that he missed in these playoffs here, where all of a sudden it just looked like he's completely lost confidence from the line, when it looked like he was completely more confident at the line at a stretch this year. So I don't know. Do you feel like he doesn't want to be in that spot?
It's strange, because to me, Ben certainly never comes off as a player that's lacking confidence. But in that situation, like you said, that's all you could really chalk it up to, because absolutely there was a point during the regular season where, I remember even like tweeting about it, that he was averaging a career high from the foul line. It was up in the mid-60s, the highest he'd been shooting. He was looking confident. He was attacking the rim, pretty much at will, and looking for those free throws. And it's been a steady, decline over the past couple months since then, up until this point. So I don't necessarily think it's a confidence issue where he's not, confident, but there's obviously something in his head where he doesn't feel, the ability to go up and knock those free throws down. And it's, it's a mental thing to me, and it's obviously one that he has to, get under control.
I thought the most disappointing thing was, I thought when Embiid went out, that Harris reverted back to the Harris we got last year. He was dribbling around. He wasn't very decisive with the ball. I know they were saying he was trying to do too much, but that to me of all the things, like Simmons missing the free throws, yeah, it sucks. You got to make those free throws. If he makes those free throws, you're not necessarily definitively winning that game. You're up by a point with 2 minutes left. You still got to close that game out. Harris not taking the bull by the horns, that to me was the most disappointing.
Yeah, I agree. And I think that was probably the main factor for them losing this game. He's, especially over the course of this season, established himself as that secondary go-to guy. We saw it in game one when Joel was in foul trouble, barely played in the first half. He, Tobias put the team on his back and provided that offensive spark with decisive moves, good shot making, taking advantage of guys in the post. And last night, I think, we saw the opposite. Ish Smith gave him tough time on the perimeter a couple times where he couldn't even get past them. He wasn't doing a great job of taking advantage of mismatches in the post. Shot 8 of 24 from the floor. And like you said, he kind of looked back like the Tobias Harris from years past. Moving forward, I don't think it's something that at least I would look into too much unless it becomes a trend. But to me, his play was certainly much more of a factor in that loss than the 3 free throws that Ben missed in the fourth.
Let me ask you this, Michael Kaskey-Blomain. If Embiid can't play, does Mike Scott start, or do you got to come up with something different?
Not if I was coaching, he wouldn't, Mike. And I like Mike Scott as a guy too. I'll tell you, he's a cool, nice guy. He's cool, but there's not much of a bigger drop off that you can see when you go from Embiid to Mike Scott. It just becomes glaring. If I'm Doc in that situation and Joel can't go, I'm either, I know he doesn't like to start Dwight, so maybe I'm going small and pushing Simmons to the 5, Tobias to the 4, and throwing, a Korkmaz or a Matisse in the starting lineup, or even a George Hill. But I don't think Mike Scott can afford to play the number of minutes that he even played last night. But I do think if Joel does not play tomorrow night, I think the Sixers will be better equipped to handle it, knowing, going into the game as opposed to going in like they did last night with the same style that they'd been playing, and then all of a sudden having to readjust on the fly. I think they would do better.
I was going to follow up with that is, he goes down with 36 seconds. He came back and played 4 minutes and then left and never came back after that. Once he left and never came back, it felt like they didn't really want to change the game plan on the fly. Just said, hey, let's go in with the game plan that we came with. I would think you're going to see a different style of play if he is not in the game tomorrow night.
Yeah, absolutely. And like we said, if that's starting, going a little bit smaller and putting more shooting on the floor to kind of get up and down a little bit faster, that's probably what I would do. I think that's something that's probably a pretty likely option. And I just think that they'll be better prepared. They played 21 games without Joel during the regular season, and obviously they went 10-11 during those games. But I just think mentally, the way it went last night, I think took a toll on the team. Like you said, they were, they had the game plan. They were executing it well in the first quarter, and they appeared to be well on their way to, sweeping the series. He goes out, things obviously the momentum suddenly shifts, and they just felt like they were, kind of struggling to keep up for the rest of that game. I would expect a different approach, especially tomorrow night, obviously at home in front of the full capacity at the Wells Fargo Center.
Yeah, Curry, by the way, did not make a 3 either. That's not a good recipe for the Sixers if Joel Embiid's going to be out and he's not making a 3. And then you got Harris 1 for 5. I know people would say, well, then Simmons needs to shoot the ball more than 5 times. I don't have a problem with that criticism, right? I mean, if Embiid's out, he's got to be more aggressive to the basket.
Yeah, and he acknowledged that as much last night too. When he was talking to the media, he did say that he thought there was times that he could have been more aggressive.
Especially, Michael, real quick, especially if Harris is also struggling.
And I think that's where the frustration from a lot of the fan base comes in, Mike, because Ben is a guy that's labeled as a star. He's made the All-Star team, and he's not, a typical star in that way. And when you're down one starter like Joel and the next guy like Tobias is struggling, I think people want to see Ben really put his stamp on the game offensively and be a little bit more aggressive. And, I do agree in that scenario, they needed more from him. I think 5 shots, especially because he went 4 for 5. He was, pretty effective in the shots that he did take. I think you want to see him get closer to obviously 8, 9, 10 shots at least in a game like that.
Will we see more Maxey?
Yeah, I don't know how I don't know how you can't play him a little bit more with what we've seen, especially how Shake Milton's been struggling. He, I think it was a questionable decision last night even to take Maxey out of the game in the middle of that fourth quarter after he came in and, really gave the team a shot in the arm off of the bench. So he's a guy, especially if Joel's out, the Maxey can push the pace. He can, kind of be like an X factor for them. So I do expect, especially if Joel's out, to see him get some more time.
All right, Michael Kaskey-Blomain at The Real Mike KB on Twitter. He covers the NBA and the Sixers for CBS Sports. And, of course, he, like all guys, appeared via the Boardwalk Honda Hotline. Sixers, Wizards, Game 5 tomorrow here on 97.3 ESPN. All right, MKB, talk to you soon, pal.
All right, Mike, until next week.